The silverware clicked against bone china like a gun loading. My mother smiled her shark-like grin while my father poured 1982 vintage with trembling hands. They presented a document to steal my billions, claiming I was too fragile. But I am a forensic accountant. I close the file. I see 3 forgeries, and you owe Las Vegas $50 million. Their smiles vanished. If you want to see how I made them pay for every greedy cent, sit down. My name is Harper Whitmore, and I was currently seated across from the 2 people who technically gave me life, watching them attempt to steal mine. The private dining room at the Obsidian was suffocatingly opulent. The walls were lined with velvet that absorbed sound, ensuring that no screams, literal or metaphorical, could escape to the main dining floor. The air conditioning was set to a brisk 68 degrees, yet beads of sweat were already forming on my father's upper lip. I adjusted the cuff of my simple black blazer. It was off the rack, practical, and devoid of lint. In stark contrast, my mother, Meredith, looked like she had been dipped in a vat of liquid gold and preserved for future study. Her dress was a custom silk creation that probably cost more than my first car, and her jewelry was heavy enough to cause orthopedic issues. My father, Sterling, was equally polished in a bespoke tuxedo, but the tremor in his hand as he swirled his glass of 1982 vintage Cabernet Sauvignon betrayed the facade. They looked like royalty. I looked like the person who audited royalty. For the first 20 minutes, we played a grotesque game of happy families. They asked questions they had not bothered to ask in the 10 years since I left the family estate. Meredith asked about my little accounting job, with a tone one might use to ask a toddler about their finger painting. She did not know that my little job involved forensic accounting for high-stakes litigation, hunting down hidden assets for federal indictments. To her, I was just Harper, the disappointing daughter who preferred spreadsheets to galas. "You look tired, darling," Meredith cooed, reaching out to touch my hand. Her skin was cold. "The city life, it drains you, doesn't it? We worry. Harper, we worry so much." "I am fine, Mother," I said, my voice flat. I pulled my hand back, picking up my water glass. "Let us skip the appetizers. Why are there 2 strangers standing by the door?" I gestured to the 2 men in charcoal suits, standing guard at the entrance of the private room. They were not servers, they were lawyers, but not the kind I knew. "Where is Elias?" I asked. Elias Thorne had been my grandfather's shadow, his most trusted confidant, and the executor of his will. If we were discussing the estate of Silas Vane, Elias should have been sitting at the head of the table. "Elias is old school," Sterling said, his voice cracking slightly on the last syllable. He cleared his throat. "We thought a fresh perspective was needed for the transition. These gentlemen are from Bradstreet and Cole. They specialize in asset protection." "Asset protection," I repeated. "Whose assets and protection from whom?" Sterling did not answer. Instead, he reached under the table and produced a thick, leather-bound folder. He slid it across the white tablecloth. It stopped inches from my plate. The cover was stamped with the Helios Systems logo, the golden sunburst that represented an energy empire worth $3 billion. "Open it, Harper," Meredith urged, her eyes wide and glistening with faux sincerity. "It is a solution, a way to keep us all safe." I flipped the folder open. My eyes did not read the text in the traditional sense. They scanned for patterns, anomalies, and traps. It was a professional reflex. I had spent the last 7 years dissecting fraudulent ledgers and tax evasion schemes. A legal contract was just another narrative written in code. The document was titled Strategic Ownership, Restructuring, and Voluntary Conservatorship Agreement. I felt a cold spike of adrenaline in my chest, but my face remained impassive. I turned the page. Paragraph 4, Section B. It outlined a transfer of voting rights. It proposed that I, Harper Whitmore, would retain a 65% financial interest in Helios Systems, meaning I would receive dividends, but I would assign 100% of the voting power and operational control to a newly formed board of trustees. The trustees listed were Sterling Whitmore and Meredith Whitmore. I read on. Clause 12. Section D. The beneficiary acknowledges a history of emotional fragility and voluntarily cedes decision-making capacity regarding the disposition of assets to the trustees to prevent undue psychological stress. They were not just trying to take the company, they were trying to declare me incompetent. I looked up. Meredith was smiling that shark-like smile, the one that looked warm only if you didn't look at the eyes. "We know it is overwhelming, sweetie," she said softly. "Grandfather Silas, he was brilliant, but he was senile in the end. He did not understand what he was doing by leaving that burden to you. He put a target on your back. We just want to remove the target. You can live your life. You can travel. You can finally rest." "Family is everything." "Harper," Sterling added, leaning forward, "you have no experience running a conglomerate. The sharks on Wall Street will eat you alive by noon on your first day. We are doing this to protect you." The words echoed in my head, but they were drowned out by the memory of my grandfather's raspy voice from his hospital bed 2 weeks ago. "They will come for you." "Harper," he had whispered, gripping my hand with surprising strength. "Your parents are not wolves. Wolves have loyalty to the pack. Your parents are parasites. They will consume the host until it withers. Do not let them take the helm. Promise me." I closed the folder with a sharp snap that silenced the room. "No," I said. The silence that followed was absolute. The air pressure in the room seemed to drop. "Excuse me." Meredith's smile faltered, the corners of her mouth twitching. "I said no," I repeated, locking eyes with her. "I am not signing this. I am not ceding control, and I am certainly not admitting to a psychological instability that does not exist." Sterling's face flushed a deep, ugly red. He slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. "You ungrateful child," he hissed, the fatherly facade dissolving instantly. "Do you have any idea what is at stake? We are trying to save you from yourself." "You are trying to save yourselves," I corrected him calmly. "I looked at the Helios quarterly reports this morning. But more importantly, I looked at your personal filings, or rather, the filings you tried to hide." "Be careful, Harper," Sterling warned, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "If you want to play hardball, we can play. We have files too, medical records, from when you were 18, from when Bella died. Do you want the board of directors to read the therapy notes from your grief counseling? Do you want the world to know how unstable you were?" It was a low blow, even for them, bringing up my sister, Bella, and the grief that had nearly broken me a decade ago. But they had miscalculated. They thought I was still that broken teenager. They did not realize that grief, when forged in fire, becomes armor. I stood up slowly. The chair scraped against the floor, a harsh sound in the quiet room. I picked up my clutch, ignoring the contract on the table. "You can leak whatever you want, Sterling," I said, my voice steady and cold. "But before you do, you might want to check your own exposure." I leaned in, placing my hands on the table, looming over them. I read the draft. I count 3 obvious forgeries on the first page alone. That is fraud. But that is the least of your problems. I paused, letting the tension stretch until it was nearly unbearable. "I know about the $50 million you owe the syndicates in Las Vegas. I know the interest rate is compounding daily. And I know you promised them a payout from the Helios accounts by the 1st of the month." The color drained from Meredith's face so completely, she looked like a wax figure. Sterling's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The thread of my medical records died in his throat, choked off by the terrifying reality that I knew their darkest secret. "This dinner is over," I said, straightening up. "I will see you at the shareholder meeting. I suggest you bring better lawyers." I turned and walked toward the door. The 2 men in suits stepped aside hurriedly, sensing the shift in power. As I pushed open the heavy mahogany doors and stepped out into the cool Chicago night, I didn't look back. I had just declared war on my own parents. But for the first time in years, the air tasted clean. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the confrontation at the Obsidian began to fade the moment I stepped into my car. replaced by a hollow ache that resonated deep in my bones, driving through the rain-slicked streets of Chicago. I did not see the passing skyscrapers. Instead, I saw the imposing silhouette of the Whitmore estate, a sprawling Gothic revival mansion that loomed over my childhood like a mausoleum. Growing up, that house was never a home. It was a stage set managed by Sterling and Meredith, where every interaction was rehearsed for public consumption. I was the invisible child, the ghost haunting the hallways of my own life. The spotlight belonged entirely to my sister, Bella. Bella was beautiful, charismatic, and reckless. When she died in a drunk driving accident at 22, crashing her convertible into a highway divider after a night of partying. My parents did not grieve in private. They rebranded, they scrubbed the police reports, paid off the press, and turned Bella into a saint, a tragic victim of a mechanical failure. I became the living reminder of the daughter they actually wanted, yet failed to save. I was the spare heir, useful only for photo opportunities at charity galas where my parents drank champagne and pretended to care about wetlands or orphanages. My grandfather, Silas Vane, was the only person who saw me. He was a man made of iron and oil, the founder of Helios Systems, and he loathed the frivolous existence my parents led. While Sterling and Meredith were busy curating their social media presence before social media even existed, Silas would find me hiding in the library. He did not bring me dolls. He brought me puzzles, logic games, and eventually, balance sheets. The fracture that finally broke me away from the family happened when I was 18 years old. I had been accepted into a prestigious finance program, my ticket out of their suffocating orbit. I remembered walking into my father's study, acceptance letter in hand, only to be met with a dismissive wave. When I asked for the release of my college fund money that had been set aside since my birth, Sterling laughed. It was a casual, cruel sound. He explained that the liquidity was momentarily unavailable because they had purchased a new yacht, the Gilded Swan. They called it an investment in the family brand. My education, my future, had been liquidated for a floating cocktail lounge. That night, I packed a single bag. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply realized that to them, I was not a person. I was a line item that could be reallocated. I left the mansion before dawn and erased myself from their narrative. I clawed my way through university on scholarships and 3 part-time jobs. I discovered I had a talent for finding things that people wanted to keep hidden. Numbers spoke to me in a way people never did. People lied. They smiled while they stabbed you. But the numbers were honest. If $1 was missing, the math would scream about the absence. I became a forensic accountant not out of passion for finance, but out of a desperate need for truth in a world built on deceit. While my parents thought I was estranged from the entire family, I maintained a secret channel with Silas. We met on Sunday mornings at a greasy spoon diner on the edge of the city, a place where no one would recognize the billionaire industrialist, over burnt coffee and eggs. He became my mentor. He did not teach me how to invest. He taught me how to dissect. He showed me how CEOs hid losses in shell companies and how executives siphoned profits through vendor kickbacks. He was training me for war, though I did not know the enemy was my own bloodline. As Silas's health began to fail last year, the dynamic shifted. My parents circled him like vultures sensing a carcass. They visited the hospital daily, not to hold his hand, but to ensure they were visible to the board members and the press. They whispered about power of attorney in the hallway while he gasped for breath in the room. I was there at the very end. The machines were humming their rhythmic, indifferent tune. Silas sent the nurses away and demanded my parents leave the room. When we were finally alone, his grip on my hand was surprisingly firm, his skin like parchment paper over steel bones. Harper. He had wheezed, his voice barely audible over the oxygen monitor. Wealth is a dangerous thing. It is a knife. If you hold it by the blade, it will cut you to ribbons. You must hold it by the handle. He looked at me with eyes that were cloudy but fiercely intelligent. Do not let them have Helios, he commanded. They will strip it for parts to feed their vanity. I am leaving it to you, not because you are my blood, but because you are the only one who knows the value of a dollar earned rather than inherited, I had assumed he meant a significant trust fund, perhaps a seat on the board. I never imagined the sheer scale of his bequest until the lawyers contacted me privately after his death. He had bypassed an entire generation. He had handed me the handle of the knife, and now, my parents were throwing themselves against the blade. The memory faded as I unlocked the door to my apartment. It was a stark, modern space, paid for with money I had earned hunting down embezzlers. It was silent, but it was my silence. I poured a glass of water, my hands trembling uncontrollably. The brave face I had worn at the restaurant had shattered the moment I was alone. The weight of what was coming pressed down on my chest. I was not just fighting a legal battle. I was dismantling the only family I had left. I sat on the edge of my sofa and pulled out my secure phone. I dialed a number I had memorized but never used. It rang twice before a gruff, familiar voice answered. "Elias," I said, my voice shaking slightly before I forced it to steady. "They tried to force me to sign a conservatorship agreement. They are going to play dirty." There was a pause on the other end, followed by the sound of a heavy sigh. "I warned Silas this would happen," Elias Thorne replied, his tone grim. "Your parents are desperate, Harper, and desperate people do not follow rules. Are you ready for this?" I looked out the window at the city skyline, a landscape of steel and glass where my grandfather had built an empire from nothing. I thought of the yacht bought with my tuition. I thought of Bella, canonized to cover up a crime. I thought of the 3 forgeries in the document tonight. I am not just ready. "Elias," I whispered, "I am the one holding the handle now. Let us get to work." To understand the desperation I witnessed in that private dining room at the Obsidian, one must rewind 72 hours to the event that triggered their meltdown. It was the official reading of Silas Vane's last will and testament, held in the executive boardroom on the 50th floor of the Helios Systems headquarters. The room was a fortress of glass and mahogany, offering a panoramic view of Chicago that usually inspired awe, but today only promised vertigo. I arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in a charcoal suit that blended into the corporate upholstery. I sat at the far end of the long conference table, watching as my parents made their entrance. They did not walk in, they paraded. Sterling and Meredith were accompanied by a retinue of 4 junior lawyers, a personal assistant, and a stylist who was actually fluffing my mother's veil as she crossed the threshold. They were dressed in mourning black, but it was performative grief. Meredith wore a fascinator with a small net that did not hide her eyes, but rather drew attention to their dryness. Sterling strode to the head of the table, my grandfather's seat, and placed his hand on the leather backrest with a proprietary air. "Please sit, Mr. Whitmore," Elias Thorne said. He was standing by the window, his back to the view. Elias was 70 years old, with a face carved from granite and eyes that had seen every contract Silas had signed for 40 years. He did not gesture to the head of the table. He pointed to the guest chairs on the side. Sterling frowned, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face, but he complied. "Let us get this formality over with. Elias, we have a board meeting to schedule this afternoon. The markets are jittery." "Indeed," Elias said. He sat down and opened a single, thin file. There was no fanfare. Silas was very specific about his wishes. He updated this document 6 months ago, with 2 witnesses and a psychiatrist present to certify his mental state. Meredith stiffened. "Psychiatrist? Why was that necessary?" "To prevent exactly what you are thinking of doing, Meredith," Elias replied calmly. He put on his reading glasses. "I will skip the preambles. The charitable bequests are standard. The distribution of personal property is listed in the appendix. Let us discuss the controlling interest of Helios Systems." My parents leaned forward in unison. I could practically hear their heartbeats syncing with the rhythm of avarice. "To my daughter, Meredith, and her husband, Sterling," Elias read, his voice devoid of emotion. "I leave a monthly stipend of $25,000 each, adjusted annually for inflation." There was a pause. The air in the room seemed to vanish. 25,000, Sterling repeated, his voice barely a whisper. You mean 25 million? I mean 25,000, Elias corrected. This stipend is conditional. It will be paid only so long as neither party attempts to interfere with the operations, management, or board composition of Helios Systems. Any attempt to influence the company will result in the immediate and permanent termination of these payments. Meredith let out a sound that was half laugh, half choke. This is a joke. Silas had a dry sense of humor. But this is morbid. Who gets the company? Elias. Who gets the 65% voting block? Elias turned his gaze toward me. It was the first time my parents acknowledged my presence in the room. They looked at me not with recognition, but with the confusion one might feel seeing a piece of furniture suddenly come to life. The entire controlling interest of Helios Systems, including 65% of the Class A voting stock and the seat of the chairman of the board, is bequeathed to his granddaughter, Harper Whitmore. For 10 seconds, the only sound was the hum of the air filtration system. Then, Meredith exploded. It was not a gradual build. It was an instant, volcanic eruption. She stood up so abruptly her heavy chair toppled backward with a deafening crash. She grabbed a crystal pitcher of water from the center of the table and hurled it at the wall. It shattered inches from a framed patent for my grandfather's first turbine, sending glass and water raining down onto the plush carpet. "You manipulated him," she screamed, pointing a manicured finger at me. Her face, usually composed for the cameras, was twisted into a grotesque mask of rage. "You little snake! You poisoned his mind. He was senile. He did not know what he was doing." "Sit down, Meredith," Elias said, his voice cutting through her hysteria like a whip. "I have the video logs of the signing. He was lucid, he was clear, and he explicitly stated that he did not want his life's work squandered on, and I quote, frivolous social climbing and bad gambling debts." Sterling did not scream. He went very still, while Meredith ranted about fairness and family duty. I watched my father. He was doing mental arithmetic. I could see the terror behind his eyes. 25,000 a month was a fortune to most people. But to Sterling Whitmore, it was poverty. It would not cover the interest on his loans. Without access to the Helios corporate accounts, without the ability to borrow against the company's assets, he was a dead man walking. The sharks he owed money to did not care about stipends. "Harper," Sterling said, ignoring his wife's screeching. His voice was trembling. "Harper, be reasonable. You cannot run this company. You are an accountant. This is a multinational conglomerate. You need us." I stood up slowly. I did not feel triumphant. I felt a cold, heavy resolve. "I do not need you," I said clearly, "and neither does Helios. In fact, my first act as chairwoman will be to order a forensic audit of the Whitmore Family Foundation and the subsidiary logistics company you two have been managing for the last 5 years. The color drained from Sterling's face so completely he looked like a corpse. The subsidiary. That was where they had been hiding the losses. That was where they had been siphoning money. "You would not," Sterling whispered. "I start Monday," I replied. "Elias, thank you. I believe we are done here." I walked out of the boardroom while Meredith was still shouting threats of lawsuits and competency hearings. I took the elevator down to the parking garage, my heart hammering against my ribs. I knew I had just kicked a hornet's nest, but I had not anticipated how quickly the hornets would swarm. I reached my car, a sensible sedan parked in the corner of the executive lot. As I unlocked the door, a shadow detached itself from a concrete pillar. It was Sterling. He must have taken the service elevator to beat me down here. He was no longer the trembling man in the boardroom. His face was hard, his eyes dark with a mixture of panic and malice. He slammed his hand against my driver's side window, blocking me from opening the door. "You think you are clever," he spat, leaning in close. I could smell the stale coffee and fear on his breath. "You think because Silas signed a piece of paper, you are in charge. You are a little girl playing dress-up. Do not play with fire. Harper, you have no idea what we are capable of when we are backed into a corner. Get away from my car." Sterling, I said, my hand tightening on my keys. I held them like a weapon, the metal shaft protruding between my knuckles. "We will bury you," he hissed. "We will drag your name through so much mud that you will beg us to take the company off your hands just to make it stop. You want a war. You have got one." He shoved himself off the car and stormed toward his waiting limousine. I got into my vehicle and locked the doors, my hands shaking. Elias called me 10 minutes later as I was merging onto the highway. "Are you safe?" he asked. "For now," I said. "They are terrified. Elias, Sterling threatened me in the garage." "They are dangerous because they have nothing left to lose," Elias warned, his voice grave. "They will not stop at the courts. Harper, they know they cannot win a legal battle against that will, so they will try to destroy the person named in it. They will attack your reputation. They will attack your sanity. They will try to make you look unfit to lead." "Let them try," I said, though my stomach churned. "I have the truth on my side. The truth is a quiet thing." "Harper," Elias replied, "lies are loud. And your parents have a very loud megaphone. Prepare yourself. The storm is coming." I did not know then how right he was. The dinner at the Obsidian was just their opening salvo. A desperate attempt to bully me into submission before they unleashed the nuclear option. But I had walked away from that table too. Now, the real war would begin. And as I drove through the tunnel, leaving the city center behind, I realized that the only way to survive was to stop being the daughter they remembered and become the CEO they feared. The assault on my character did not begin with a subpoena. It began with a push notification at 4 a.m, less than 6 hours after I walked out of the Obsidian. My phone vibrated against the nightstand, then lit up the dark room with a relentless strobe of alerts. I rolled over, eyes gritty with lack of sleep, and picked it up. The headline on the Chicago Daily Gossip screamed in bold, sans serif font, "The hidden Whitmore is the new Helios heiress, a ticking time bomb." I sat up, the sheets pooling around my waist. The article was a masterpiece of vague insinuations and anonymous sources. It painted a portrait of a reclusive, unstable woman who had fled her family home in a fit of teenage hysteria and had spent the last decade drifting through low-level accounting jobs, battling undefined personal demons. It referenced my sister Bella's death, twisting the tragedy into a weapon. They claimed I had been so jealous of Bella's success and beauty that her death had sent me into a psychotic break, forcing my parents to distance themselves for their own safety. It was fiction, but it was high-quality fiction. This was not the work of a bored blogger. This was a professional hit job. My parents had hired a black PR firm, a specialized agency that destroys reputations for a fee. By 7 a.m, the narrative had jumped from the tabloids to the financial news tickers. Wall Street Watch ran a segment titled "Helios in Flux," questioning whether a woman with no executive experience and a troubled medical history was fit to manage a $3 billion energy conglomerate. The stock price of Helios Systems opened at $98 a share and immediately dipped to $94. That was a 4% drop in minutes. Hundreds of millions of dollars in market capitalization evaporated because someone paid a few journalists to ask leading questions. I showered and dressed in my armor, a sharp navy suit, and prepared to go to the office. But when I stepped out of the elevator into the lobby of my apartment building, the flashbulbs blinded me. A dozen photographers were camped outside the glass doors. They surged forward like a pack of wild dogs, shouting questions that were really accusations. "Harper, is it true you were in rehab?" "Harper, did you threaten your mother?" "Are you high right now?" "Harper?" I pushed past them, keeping my head down and my face impassive. I knew the rules of this game. If I frowned, I was angry. If I smiled, I was manic. If I cried, I was unstable. The only winning move was to be a statue. Later that afternoon, the second wave hit. A series of photos surfaced on social media. They showed me leaving a dive bar called the Rusty Nail 3 nights ago. In reality, I had been there to meet a confidential informant regarding an embezzlement case I was wrapping up. The lighting was poor, and the pavement was uneven. In the photos, heavily cropped and filtered. I looked disheveled. One shot caught me stumbling slightly as my heel caught in a grate, but the caption read, "Helios heiress stumbles out of bar at 2 a.m. Relapse." The internet mob devoured it. Comments poured in by the thousands. "Rich brat, junkie, she is going to ruin the company, her poor parents, my parents." They were the conductors of this symphony. At 6 p.m, I turned on the television in my office at Helios. Meredith was on Primetime Live. The set was designed to look cozy, with soft lighting and beige armchairs. Meredith was wearing a pastel blue cardigan, a color chosen to evoke sympathy and softness. She held a tissue in her hand, dabbing at eyes that were perfectly dry. "We love Harper," Meredith told the interviewer, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "We have always loved her, but she has struggled since Bella passed. She has not been the same. We tried to give her space. We thought she was getting better, but this, inheriting the company. It is too much pressure. We just want her to come home. We want her to rest." "You are worried about her mental state?" the interviewer asked, leaning in. "I am terrified," Meredith whispered. "I am terrified she's going to hurt herself or destroy the legacy her grandfather built. We are just trying to help her carry this burden." It was a brilliant performance. She was the grieving, concerned mother, and I was the ungrateful, sick daughter. She was laying the groundwork publicly for what came next. The climax of their campaign arrived the following morning. A document was leaked to a prominent gossip site. It appeared to be a psychological evaluation from a private clinic, dated 2 weeks prior. The header bore the name of Dr. Marcus Reed, a psychiatrist known for catering to the wealthy and discreet. I read the report on my tablet, my blood running cold. It detailed sessions that never happened. It described symptoms I never had. The patient exhibits signs of paranoid delusions, grandiose thinking, detachment from reality, risk of financial self-destruction. The diagnosis at the bottom of the page was underlined in red: schizophreniform disorder with paranoia. This was the kill shot. This was the piece of paper they needed. They were not just trying to embarrass me. They were building a case for a conservatorship. They wanted to do to me what had been done to pop stars and actors. If they could convince a judge that I was mentally incapacitated, the court would appoint a guardian to manage my affairs. That guardian would be Sterling Whitmore. They would take control of my life, my money, and Helios systems. I would be a prisoner in my own body, legally stripped of the right to sign a check or hire a lawyer. My assistant, a young woman named Sarah, who looked ready to faint, stood in the doorway of my office. "Ms. Whitmore," she stammered, "the board of directors is calling for an emergency meeting, and legal is on line 1. They say the stock is in free fall." "Tell them I am in a meeting," I said, my voice calm. "But are you—" "Yes," I replied, "with myself." I did not issue a press release. I did not go on Twitter to scream about my innocence. Denying a rumor only gave it oxygen. Instead, I closed my blinds and sat at my high-performance workstation. I was not just a CEO. I was a forensic expert. I knew how to follow digital footprints. I bypassed the corporate firewall and engaged the software I had written myself years ago. I began to trace the source of the leaked medical report. It had been uploaded from a secure server, but the uploader had made a rookie mistake. They had used a VPN, but the timestamp correlated perfectly with a data packet sent from an IP address in the Cayman Islands. I dug deeper. The IP address belonged to a shell company called Obsidian PR. I cross-referenced the payment records I had flagged earlier in my parents' personal accounts. There it was. A transfer of $200,000 to Obsidian PR 3 days ago. Then I went for Dr. Marcus Reed. I accessed the public metadata of his clinic's scheduling system. On the days I was allegedly in his office having these delusions, the metadata showed his office was closed for renovations. Furthermore, I found a wire transfer in his personal offshore account, $50,000, deposited the day before the report was dated. I sat back, the blue light of the monitors illuminating my face. They thought they were burying me under a mountain of lies. They did not realize they were just giving me more ammunition. I was not going to debate them in the press. I was going to dissect them in court. I saved every screenshot, every log, every IP trace to an encrypted drive. I printed hard copies and locked them in my safe. My silence was not a weakness. It was the deep breath a sniper takes before pulling the trigger. Let them have their moment on television. Let them think they had won. The higher they climbed on this ladder of lies, the harder they would fall when I kicked it out from under them. The legal assault arrived at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, delivered by a process server who looked bored despite the grenade he was handing me. I was in my office, reviewing the legitimate audit logs of Helios Systems, when the man dropped a thick envelope on my desk. He mumbled a legal obligation phrase and vanished. I opened the packet. It was an ex parte emergency motion for temporary suspension of executive powers. My parents had not waited for the shareholder meeting. They had filed a petition in the family court, claiming that I was an immediate danger to myself and the financial stability of the company. The evidence attached to the motion was a work of pure fiction. It was a sworn affidavit describing the dinner at the Obsidian. According to this document, I had not calmly walked out. Instead, it claimed I had screamed obscenities, thrown a glass of wine at my mother, and threatened to burn the company to the ground in a manic fit. They had even included a statement from a waiter. I recognized the name. He was the young man who had refilled our water. I wondered how much it cost to buy the integrity of a college student in debt. $5,000, $10,000. The lawyer representing them was Vance Halloway. The name made my stomach turn. Halloway was a New York litigator, known in legal circles as the Butcher. He did not practice law. He practiced destruction. He specialized in high-conflict divorces and estate wars where the goal was not settlement, but the total annihilation of the opposing party. If Sterling and Meredith had hired Halloway, they were burning through their remaining cash reserves at a terrifying rate. I reached for my phone to call Elias, but before I could dial, a notification popped up from my personal banking app. Account frozen. Contact branch immediately. I tried my second bank. Same message. My credit cards declined. In the span of an hour, they had weaponized the legal system to cut off my financial oxygen. They were trying to starve me out, forcing me to come crawling back just to buy a sandwich. I left the office immediately. I needed to get to my apartment, pack a bag, and regroup. But when I walked into my penthouse, the air felt wrong. The silence was too heavy. I walked to the smart home control panel on the wall. The screen was dark. I tapped it. It rebooted, showing a system uptime of only 45 minutes. My security system had been offline for 2 hours. I went to the logs. The entry and exit data from the past 24 hours had been wiped. Someone had been here. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hands remained steady. This was a crime scene now. I moved to my bedroom, scanning the space. Nothing seemed out of place, which was the most disturbing part. A thief takes things. A spy leaves things. I grabbed my handbag, the one I had taken to the Obsidian. I dumped the contents onto the bed: lipstick, wallet, phone, keys. I ran my fingers along the inner lining of the expensive leather. I felt a tiny, hard lump near the stitching. I used a nail file to pry the seam open. Inside was a black disc, smaller than a dime, a listening device, high fidelity, long-range battery. They had planted it at dinner. Likely when I went to the restroom or when the lawyers distracted me. They had been listening to every call, every strategy session with Elias, every breath I took for 3 days. I did not scream. I did not smash the bug. I dropped it into a glass of water on the nightstand to drown the circuit. Then I packed a go bag. I took no electronics other than a burner laptop I kept for emergencies. I left my primary phone and smartwatch on the kitchen counter. If they wanted to track me, let them track a ghost. I checked into a nondescript business hotel near O'Hare Airport under a pseudonym. Paying with a prepaid debit card I kept in a physical safe for emergencies like this. The room was beige and smelled of industrial cleaner, a sharp contrast to the luxury my parents were fighting for. I swept the room for bugs, set up a portable signal jammer, and opened the burner laptop. It was time to stop defending and start hunting. I connected to the internet through 3 encrypted proxies. My target was no longer just the immediate fraud. I needed to know where the money was coming from. My parents were broke, yet they had hired Vance Holloway and a black PR firm. That kind of talent required retainers in the 6 figures. Who was funding them? I bypassed the standard banking channels and dove into the dark corners of the offshore financial network. I used the credentials I had harvested from Sterling's laptop during the honeypot operation, the ones he thought gave him access to Helios, but actually gave me access to him. I traced the wire transfers that had paid Holloway. They did not come from a Whitmore account. They came from a shell company in the Cayman Islands called Sterling Holdings. The name was a narcissistic blend of Meredith and Sterling, typical, but when I hacked into the corporate registry of the Cayman firm, the blood drained from my face. The directors of Sterling Holdings were not listed as Sterling or Meredith Whitmore. The sole director and beneficiary was listed as Harper Whitmore. I stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. There was a digital copy of the incorporation papers. At the bottom was my signature. It was a perfect forgery, likely traced from old birthday cards or university documents. I dug deeper into the transaction history of Sterling Holdings. The account was a washing machine. Millions of dollars were flowing in from shell companies in Eastern Europe and South America, sitting for 24 hours, and then being wired out to legitimate businesses in the United States as consulting fees or real estate investments. This was not just tax evasion. This was high-level money laundering. I looked at the specific amounts. $9,000 here, $9,500 there. It was smurfing structuring deposits to avoid federal reporting triggers. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. My parents were not just trying to steal my inheritance. They were setting me up to be the fall guy for a massive criminal enterprise. They had opened this company in my name, forged my signature, and were using it to wash dirty money for God knows whom, a cartel, a syndicate, a mob. If this house of cards collapsed, Sterling and Meredith would claim they were innocent victims, elderly parents abused by a criminal mastermind daughter. They would point to this shell company as proof that I was the one laundering money, that I was the criminal. The mental instability narrative was just the cherry on top, a way to explain why I would do something so reckless. I sat back in the cheap hotel chair, staring at the glowing screen. The betrayal was absolute. They did not just want my money. They were willing to send me to federal prison for 20 years to save their own skins. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, hot and angry. I wiped it away instantly. There was no room for sadness. Sadness was a luxury for people who were not being framed for international felonies. I copied every single file. I traced the IP addresses of the logins. They all pointed back to my father's private study at the mansion. I had proof that he was the one operating the account, not me. I picked up the burner phone and dialed a number. Not Elias. This was beyond civil law now. "Agent Miller," I said when the voice on the other end answered. "This is Harper. We need to talk, and you're going to want to bring a warrant." The preliminary hearing for the conservatorship took place 3 days later at the Cook County Circuit Court. My parents arrived expecting a coronation. I arrived ready for a performance. They had clearly briefed the press. A phalanx of cameras awaited us at the bottom of the courthouse steps. Sterling and Meredith emerged from their limousine looking somber, clutching each other for support, playing the role of heartbroken parents forced to take drastic measures to save their wayward daughter. They wore muted colors, and Meredith had even forgone her usual diamonds for a modest string of pearls. I exited my taxi a block away and walked the rest of the distance. I wore a tailored cream suit, a deliberate choice to stand out against the gray stone of the building, and my hair was pulled back in a severe, flawless chignon. I walked with a steady, rhythmic cadence, chin high, eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses that I removed only as I passed the metal detectors. I did not look like a woman in the throes of a psychotic break. I looked like a CEO on her way to a merger. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with the scent of floor wax and expensive cologne. Vance Holloway, their bulldog lawyer, sat at the plaintiff's table, looking smug. He had a stack of motions 3 inches high when the judge, a stern woman named Justice Weaver, called the session to order. I sat perfectly still, My hands were folded on the table, not clenching, not trembling. "Your Honor," Holloway boomed, his voice filling the room. "We are here to prevent a tragedy. Ms. Whitmore is exhibiting a rapid decline in mental stability. We have submitted affidavits regarding violent outbursts and medical reports, confirming a diagnosis of severe paranoia. We ask for immediate temporary guardianship to be granted to her father, Sterling Whitmore, to protect the assets of Helios Systems." This was the moment. Elias Thorne stood up slowly. He looked tired. His suit was slightly rumpled. To the untrained eye, he looked like an old man out of his depth. "Your Honor," Elias said, his voice lacking its usual thunder. We object to the characterization of the defendant. We believe these claims are exaggerated. We request a continuance to gather our own medical experts." It was a weak defense. It was pathetic. And it was exactly what we had planned. I watched my parents out of the corner of my eye. Sterling leaned back in his chair, a smirk touching his lips. Meredith exhaled a long breath, her shoulders relaxing. They thought Elias was failing. They thought I was cornered, relying on a senile lawyer who didn't have the energy to fight Holloway. Justice Weaver frowned. "Mr. Thorne, the allegations here are serious. If you cannot provide counter-evidence today, I am inclined to grant a temporary motion allowing Mr. Whitmore limited access to company accounts for emergency maintenance until a full hearing can be held next week." "We understand, Your Honor," Elias mumbled. The gavel banged. A limited victory for them, a trap for me. The judge had just given Sterling exactly enough rope to hang himself. As we left the courtroom, Sterling brushed past me. "It is over, Harper," he whispered, his voice dripping with triumphant venom. "Daddy is back in charge." I did not reply. I just checked my watch. The game had officially begun. I returned to my hotel room, which had been transformed into a digital command center. The curtains were drawn, and the blue glow of 3 monitors illuminated the space. I sat down and cracked my knuckles. At 4:30 in the afternoon, a red alert flashed on my center screen. "Unauthorized access attempt admin root user." Sterling was wasting no time. He was using the temporary court order to try to breach the Helios mainframe from his home office. "Welcome back, Dad," I whispered. I typed a command sequence. Instead of blocking him, I opened the gate, but I did not let him into the real Helios server. I routed his connection to a honeypot, a mirror server I had built over the last 48 hours. It looked exactly like the real financial dashboard, but every number, every account, and every file was a fabrication. On his screen, Sterling would see a folder labeled Emergency Liquid Reserves. Inside, I had planted a fake ledger showing a balance of $20 million. I watched the logs scroll in real time. User S. Whitmore, action view balance, pause, action initiate transfer. He was not checking the health of the company. He was looting it. He entered the routing number for an account in the Cayman Islands. Not the money laundering account I had found earlier, but a different one, likely attached to the gambling syndicates he owed. He typed in the amount, $2 million. I left the transfer process. On his end, he saw a green success banner. On my end, the money did not move anywhere, but the digital forensic evidence was cemented forever. I did not just capture the keystrokes. I activated a remote script that hijacked the webcam on his laptop. A new window popped up on my screen. There he was, sitting in his study, a glass of scotch in one hand, a cigar in the other. He looked euphoric. He laughed, a deep, belly-shaking sound, and toasted the screen. "Got you," I said, saving the video file. I now had video proof of him embezzling corporate funds less than 2 hours after telling a judge he needed to protect the company. But I was not done. I needed the other half of the monster. At 7 o'clock that evening, I drove a rental car to a medical office building in the suburbs. Dr. Marcus Reed, the psychiatrist who had sold his soul for $50,000, was working late. I slipped past the cleaning crew and walked into his reception area. The lights were dimmed. Reed was in his office, packing a leather briefcase. When he looked up and saw me standing in the doorway, He dropped a file on the floor. "Ms. Whitmore," he stammered, his face draining of color. You cannot be here. I have a restraining order pending." "Sit down, Marcus," I said, my voice low and hard. I tossed a manila envelope onto his desk. It slid across the mahogany surface and stopped next to his hand. "Open it." He hesitated, then opened the flap. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a printout of the wire transfer from Obsidian PR to his offshore account in Belize. "That is $50,000, I said. "Deposited the day before you signed a sworn affidavit diagnosing a woman you have never met with schizophrenia. That is medical malpractice, insurance fraud, and perjury in the state of Illinois. That is a minimum of 10 years in prison." Reed collapsed into his chair. He looked small, sweaty, and pathetic. "They told me you were sick," he wheezed. "They said it was a formality. They said they just needed to help you." "I do not care what they said," I cut him off. "Here is the deal. You are going to lose your license. That is inevitable. But whether you lose your freedom depends on the next 5 minutes. I placed my phone on the desk and opened the recording app. "Call her," I ordered. "Call Meredith. Tell her you are worried the court might ask for your session notes. Get her to admit the diagnosis is fake." Reed's hands shook so badly he had to use 2 hands to hold his phone. He dialed. "Meredith," he said, his voice cracking. "Marcus." My mother's voice was sharp, annoyed. "Why are you calling me?" "Is it done?" I am worried," Reed said, looking at me. I nodded encouragingly. "The judge. She might want to see the clinical notes. I don't have any notes. Meredith, I never saw Harper. If they find out—" "Stop whining, you coward," Meredith snapped. Her voice was crystal clear on the speakerphone. "Nobody cares about the notes. The girl is a wreck. We say she is crazy, so she is crazy. We paid you to sign the paper, not to ask questions. Just keep your mouth shut and enjoy the money. By next week, she will be locked up in a facility in Switzerland and nobody will ever ask about her again." I reached out and ended the call. The silence in the room was deafening. Reed looked at me with pleading eyes. Was that enough?" he asked. "It was perfect," I said. I picked up my phone and the envelope. "You will testify to this at the appropriate time. Until then, do not leave the city. If you run, the FBI gets this file before I even finish my coffee." I walked out of the office into the cool night air. My heart was pounding, not from fear, but from the thrill of the hunt. I had the embezzlement. I had perjury. I had a conspiracy. I could go to the police right now and end it. But that would be too easy. That would be a quiet arrest, a back-page news story. They wanted to humiliate me in front of the world. They wanted a public spectacle. I would give them one. The annual shareholder meeting of Helio Systems was in 48 hours. It was the biggest event on the corporate calendar. All the investors would be there. The press would be there. I looked at the data on my phone. I had enough ammunition to level a city. I was not going to fire a warning shot. I was going to drop the bomb when they were standing at the very center of the stage. The clock on the wall of the secure conference room ticked with the rhythmic precision of a metronome. It was exactly 24 hours before the gavel would strike to open the annual shareholder meeting of Helio Systems. The city of Chicago was bustling outside, oblivious to the fact that a $3 billion empire was about to undergo a violent seismic shift. My phone buzzed on the mahogany table. It was a text message from Meredith. I had blocked her calls, but I left the text channel open to gather evidence of harassment. "Harper. Darling." The message read, "Please be reasonable. If you withdraw your claim before tomorrow, your father and I are willing to let you keep the downtown apartment. We will even provide a monthly allowance of $5,000 so you can focus on your recovery. Do not embarrass yourself and us in front of the whole world. We love you." I stared at the screen, my expression unmoving. The audacity was almost impressive. They were offering me my own property and a pittance of an allowance, paid for with money they had stolen from my inheritance, in exchange for my surrender. They truly believed I was cowering in a dark room, terrified of the public humiliation they had orchestrated. I did not reply. Silence is a weapon that narcissists cannot understand. It makes them question their control. I looked up at Elias Thorne. He was sitting across from me. Surrounded by a team of 4 forensic auditors, I had flown in from New York. The table was buried under stacks of paper. This was not a presentation. It was an autopsy of my parents' greed. "Is the dossier complete?" I asked. Elias adjusted his glasses and tapped a thick binder in front of him. "It is 500 pages of undeniable proof. Harper, we have the shell companies, the forged signatures on the laundering accounts, the IP logs from the honeypot theft, and the affidavit from Dr. Reed. It is bulletproof." "Good," I said. "Bind it. Make 300 copies, 1 for every shareholder, 1 for every journalist, and 1 for the SEC agents who will be in the back row." I needed air. I left the team to finish the coalition and drove my rental car to the outskirts of the city, to the private cemetery where the Vane family plot lay under the shade of ancient oak trees. The sky was a bruised purple, threatening rain. I stood before my grandfather's grave. The marble was cold to the touch. Silas Vane, visionary, industrialist. "I wish you were here to see this," I whispered to the stone. "You told me to hold the knife by the handle. Well, I am gripping it so tight my knuckles are white. Tomorrow, I am going to cut the cancer out of this family." It was a moment of quiet communion, a chance to steady my breathing before the final plunge, but the peace was shattered by the vibration of my phone. It was not a text this time. It was an automated alert from the county clerk's office. I frowned. I had set up a watch on all deeds and titles associated with the Whitmore and Vane names weeks ago, just in case. I opened the notification. A new lien had been recorded against the Whitmore ancestral estate, the mansion where my parents lived, but which was legally titled to me under the terms of the trust. My parents had taken out a second mortgage on the property at 9 o'clock this morning. I tapped into the details. The lender was not a bank. It was a private liability company called Omega Capital, a known front for high-risk, high-interest lending essentially, legalized loan sharking. The loan amount was $3 million. But I had never signed the authorization. I felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the wind. To secure that loan, they must have forged my signature on a property deed. This was no longer just corporate malfeasance or white-collar embezzlement. This was mortgage fraud. This was identity theft on a massive scale. This was a federal crime that carried a mandatory minimum sentence. They had sold the roof over their heads to fund their legal war against me, using my name to do it. I got back into the car and dialed a number. "Agent Miller," I said when the line connected. "I have the final nail. They just mortgaged my house with a forged deed. We have enough to pick them up now." "Harper," Agent Miller replied. "We can arrest them at the mansion tonight. We can save you the spectacle of tomorrow." "No," I said, my voice hard. "If you arrest them tonight, the narrative gets muddy. They will spin it. They will say it is a misunderstanding, that I framed them. The press will speculate. The stock will tank." I merged onto the highway, the city lights rising before me. "I need you to wait," I continued. "I need them to walk onto that stage tomorrow. I need them to make their move. I need them to publicly claim they are the saviors of Helios Systems. And then, when they have nowhere to hide, I want you to walk through the doors." There was a pause on the line. "That is theatrical, Ms. Whitmore." "It is necessary," I countered. "The rot is deep, Agent Miller. The only way to clean it out is to expose it to the harshest light possible." "Very well," Miller agreed. "We will have teams at the exits, SEC and FBI. We will move on your signal." That evening, while I sat in my hotel room eating a club sandwich and reviewing the final slide deck, social media was buzzing with photos from the Whitmore mansion. My parents were throwing a pre-victory cocktail party. I scrolled through the images. There was Meredith, holding a glass of champagne, laughing with the few socialites who had not yet abandoned them. There was Sterling, smoking a cigar, looking like the king of the world. They looked relieved. They looked arrogant. They truly believed that the combination of the smear campaign and the emergency court order had finished me. They thought I was broken, hiding in shame, ready to sign whatever they put in front of me. They had no idea that the house they were partying in was already evidence in a criminal investigation. They had no idea that the champagne they were drinking was bought with stolen money that I had tracked down to the cent. I turned off the phone. I did not feel anger anymore. I felt a strange, detached pity. They were like actors on a stage, unaware that the curtain was about to fall and crush them. I went to bed at 10 o'clock, usually, the night before a major trial or a complex audit. I would toss and turn, my mind racing with variables. But tonight, the variables were gone. The math was done. The equation was balanced. I closed my eyes and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. The kind of rest that only comes to the innocent or the executioner who knows their blade is sharp. Tomorrow, the world will see the truth. Tomorrow, the Whitmore name would burn, and from the ashes, Harper Vane would rise, the grand ballroom of the Palmer House. Hilton was a cavern of gold leaf and crystal, packed to capacity with the financial elite of Chicago. 500 shareholders, analysts, and journalists sat in rows of velvet chairs, a sea of dark suits and skepticism. The air was thick with the murmur of speculation. The stock price of Helios Systems had been volatile all week, fueled by the rumors of my mental collapse, and today was the day the market expected a correction. I stood in the wings of the stage, hidden by heavy velvet curtains, watching the monitor. My parents sat in the front row, center. They were a vision of tragic nobility. Sterling wore a suit that cost more than the average American car. His posture erect, his face grave. Meredith was dressed in a conservative navy dress, a lace handkerchief clutched in her hand, ready to dab away tears that would inevitably appear on cue. They looked like the saviors the company needed. They looked like they had already won. The chairman of the governance committee, a man named Henderson, who had been a golfing buddy of my father for 20 years, took the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," Henderson said, his voice grave, "we face a unique crisis. The legacy of Silas Vane is at risk, due to the unfortunate health circumstances of the designated heir. The board has received a motion to temporarily transfer voting control to Mr. Sterling Whitmore and Mrs. Meredith Whitmore." He gestured to Meredith. She stood up, receiving a ripple of sympathetic applause. She walked to the stairs, paused as if gathering her strength, and ascended the stage. She took the microphone, her hands trembling just enough to be visible to the cameras. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice amplified through the hall. "This is the hardest day of my life. No mother wants to admit that her child is broken. We love Harper. We love her with all our hearts, but the pressure of this company has pushed her to a breaking point. We are stepping in not because we want power, but because we want to save our daughter. We ask for your vote to let us carry this burden until she is well again." A hushed reverence fell over the room. I saw journalists typing furiously on their laptops. Devoted mother saves empire. The narrative was solidifying. The stock ticker on the side screen dipped another 2%. It was time. I walked out from the wings. I did not run. I did not shout. I walked with the measured, predatory gait of a woman who owns the floor. The sound of my heels clicking on the hardwood stage cut through the silence like a metronome. Meredith froze. She turned, her eyes widening in genuine shock. She had expected me to be sedated, or at least barred by security. "Harper," she said, forgetting to use the microphone, her voice shrill. "What are you doing here? You should be resting." I reached the podium and gently, firmly, took the microphone from her hand. She was too stunned to resist. I turned to the audience. The blinding lights washed over me, but I didn't blink. "My mother is a gifted storyteller," I said, my voice steady and cold. "But I am an auditor, and auditors do not deal in stories. We deal in receipts." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Sterling stood up in the front row, his face flushing red. "This is exactly what we are talking about," Sterling shouted, pointing at me. She is having an episode. Security, get her off the stage. Two security guards started to move from the side, but I held up a hand. Before you remove the majority shareholder, I said, my voice hardening, I suggest you look at the screen behind me. I have prepared a different kind of financial report. I clicked the remote in my hand. The massive LED screen that had been displaying the Helios logo flickered and changed. It was not a spreadsheet. It was a high-definition video. The room gasped. It was footage from 2 days ago. Sterling Whitmore, sitting in his study, a glass of scotch in his hand, a cigar smoke curling around his head. He looked jubilant. The audio was crystal clear. $2 million, the video, Sterling said, laughing as he typed on his laptop. Easy as taking candy from a baby. Let the little brat rot in court. By the time they figure it out, we will be in the Maldives. On the screen, the transfer confirmation popped up. Transfer complete, $2 million to Cayman account 7789. I watched the color drain from the real Sterling's face in the front row. He sank back into his chair, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. That video was taken 48 hours ago, I narrated calmly. While my father was petitioning the court for emergency control to protect the company, he was actively embezzling what he thought were company funds into an offshore gambling account. This is a deep fake, Meredith screamed, grabbing my arm. It is fake, she made it up. I shook her off and clicked the remote again. And this, I said, is from yesterday evening. The screen went black, and audio began to play. It was the phone call between Meredith and Dr. Marcus Reed. Stop whining, you coward. Meredith's voice boomed through the ballroom, sharp and cruel. Nobody cares about the notes. The girl is a wreck. We say she is crazy, so she is crazy. We paid you to sign the paper. Just keep your mouth shut and enjoy the money. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. It was the silence of a vacuum, where all oxygen had been sucked out. Every camera was now trained on Meredith. She looked like she had been slapped. The sympathetic mother mask was gone, replaced by the terrified face of a woman realizing the trap had snapped shut. Whatever you think this is, I continued, addressing the shareholders directly, it is not a family tragedy. It is a corporate crime, but I have one last exhibit. I clicked the remote a final time. A document appeared on the screen. It was a property deed, side by side with a signature verification analysis. This morning, my parents mortgaged the Whitmore ancestral estate for $3 million to a high-risk lender. I explained. The house belongs to the Silas Vane Trust. I am the sole trustee. The signature authorizing this loan is a forgery. They stole my identity to fund the legal campaign to declare me incompetent. I looked down at my parents. They were huddled together, but not in support. They were shrinking, trying to make themselves small enough to disappear into the floor. The flashbulbs were blinding now, a strobe light of humiliation. You wanted the company, I said to them, my voice low but amplified to every corner of the room. You wanted the money, you wanted the attention. Well, you have the attention now, but the money is gone. And the company? I looked up at the board members, who were staring at me in awe and terror. The company is under new management. The double doors at the back of the ballroom burst open. The sound was like a thunderclap. 20 agents in windbreakers marched in. They moved with military precision. The letters on their backs were clear: FBI, SEC. Sterling Whitmore, Meredith Whitmore. The lead agent's voice boomed. Please stand up and place your hands behind your heads. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. My parents did not stand. They were hauled to their feet by the agents. Sterling tried to run toward the side exit, a pathetic, stumbling dash, but he was tackled by a security guard who had realized which way the wind was blowing. Meredith began to scream. It was a primal, ugly sound. She did this. She set us up. She is a criminal, Harper. Tell them we are your parents. I stood on the podium, looking down at the chaos. I did not smile. I did not look away. I watched as the handcuffs were slapped onto their wrists, the same wrists that had worn diamond bracelets and Swiss watches only moments ago. I have no parents, I said into the microphone. my final words to the room. I have defendants. As they were dragged out of the ballroom, the flashbulbs exploding in their faces, the stock ticker on the screen behind me flickered. Helios Systems, HLS up 6%. The market loved a winner, and for the first time in my life, I was not the victim. I was the one writing the history. The chaos that erupted in the grand ballroom was not the frantic panic of a fire drill. It was the precise, surgical dismantling of a facade that had stood for 30 years. The Federal Bureau of Investigation did not run. They advanced. The agents moved through the sea of stunned shareholders like a tide of dark blue nylon, converging on the front row where my parents were currently disintegrating. Sterling Whitmore, a man who had spent his life believing consequences were for poor people, made a desperate, animalistic decision. As the lead agent reached for him, my father bolted. He shoved a waiter aside, knocking a tray of crystal glasses to the floor, and scrambled toward the service exit on the east wall. It was a pathetic sight, a man in a $5,000 tuxedo stumbling over his own entitlement. He did not make it to the door. Two large men in black suits stepped in front of him, blocking his path with the immovability of a concrete wall. They were the head of Helios Corporate Security, and his deputy men my father had treated like furniture for a decade. "Step aside," Sterling barked, though his voice cracked with terror. "I am the CEO. I order you to move." The security chief did not blink. He looked over Sterling's head, locking eyes with me on the stage. I gave a barely perceptible nod. "You are trespassing, Mr. Whitmore," the chief said, his voice flat. He grabbed Sterling by the arm, not with the gentle touch of a subordinate, but with the firm grip of a bouncer ejecting a drunk. He spun my father around and shoved him straight into the chest of the approaching federal agents. "Sterling Whitmore," the agent announced, his voice booming over the din. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit money laundering." While Sterling went limp, Meredith went nuclear. She was not running. She was performing. As the agents pulled her arms behind her back, she threw her head back and wailed, a sound that was meant to be tragic but came out as a screech. "My daughter!" she screamed, twisting toward the cameras, her face contorted. "She is doing this. She is sick, Harper. Tell them to unhand your mother. How can you stand there and watch this? I carried you, I gave you life." The handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists. It was a sharp, mechanical sound that cut through her hysterics. Snap, snap. I stood at the podium, gripping the edges of the wood. I did not smile. I did not frown. I looked down at her with the clinical detachment of a coroner examining a particularly messy autopsy. "You gave me life," I said into the microphone, my voice calm enough to freeze the room. "And then you tried to sell it for a line of credit." The cameras flashed in a strobe light frenzy as the agents marched them out. Meredith was still kicking, her heels dragging on the carpet, shouting obscenities that would ensure her removal from every social register in the country. Sterling walked with his head down, sobbing quietly, his entire persona of the powerful patriarch dissolving into a puddle of fear. As the double doors swung shut behind them, the room turned back to me. 500 people held their breath. "I apologize for the interruption," I said, smoothing the lapel of my jacket. "As I was saying, Helios Systems is now under new management. We will be fully cooperating with the Department of Justice to recover all misappropriated assets. The stock trading halt will be lifted in 1 hour. I suggest you hold on to your shares." The applause that followed was hesitant at first, then thunderous. It was not applause for me as a person. It was applause for stability. The market had seen the rot excised, and the market was relieved. The following week was a blur of legal bureaucracy and vindication. The fall of the Whitmore dynasty was swift and brutal. Since the mortgage on the mansion was fraudulent, the property was seized as evidence. The foreclosure signs went up on the wrought iron gates before the paparazzi had even left. The unraveling of their finances was total. The forensic teams found that my parents were not just broke. They were in a hole so deep they would never see the sun. They owed millions to banks, millions to the casinos, and millions to private lenders who were far less polite than the FBI. The social fallout was even more satisfying. The friends who had sipped champagne at their parties and whispered about my instability were now scrambling to distance themselves. I read an interview in the Chicago Tribune with a woman who had been Meredith's maid of honor. "I always knew there was something off about Meredith," the woman was quoted as saying. "She was so tacky with her money, always flaunting it, and the way she treated that poor daughter, we all saw it coming. They were rats fleeing a sinking yacht, rewriting history to pretend they hadn't been enjoying the cruise." 10 days after the arrest, I went to the Metropolitan Correctional Center. It was a grim, triangular skyscraper in downtown Chicago, a vertical fortress of concrete and misery. I was cleared through security, surrendering my phone and purse, and led to a private visitation room reserved for high-profile cases. My parents were brought in separately, but I asked for them to be seated together on the other side of the thick plexiglass partition. They looked like ghosts. Sterling had not shaved in days, his gray stubble making him look 20 years older. Meredith was wearing an oversized orange jumpsuit that washed out her pale complexion. Her hair, usually a helmet of hairspray, hung limp and greasy around her face. They sat down. Sterling refused to look at me, staring at his hands which were cuffed to the table. Meredith, however, pressed her palms against the glass. "Harper," she breathed, her eyes wide and desperate. "Harper, thank God. You have to get us out. The lawyer, he says they are denying bail. He says they are talking about 20 years. You have to tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them we can pay it back." I sat in the metal chair, my posture straight. "You cannot pay it back. Mother, you have nothing. The mansion is gone. The cars are seized. Even your jewelry is being auctioned off by the state to pay your legal fees." "We did it for the family," she cried, tears streaming down her face, real tears this time, tears of self-pity. "We did it to keep the Whitmore name alive. We wanted to leave you a legacy. Why are you being so cruel? We are your parents." "No," I said softly. "You did it for the applause. You did it because you could not bear the thought of living within your means. You stole my tuition. You stole my identity. You stole my name. And you tried to steal my sanity." I looked at Sterling. "Do you have anything to say, Father?" He looked up slowly. His eyes were hollow. "Is the company safe?" I paused. It was the first time he had asked about something other than himself. But then I realized he wasn't asking about the employees or the mission. He was asking about his status symbol. "The company is thriving," I said. "Because the parasites have been removed." Meredith slammed her fist against the glass. "You ungrateful witch, I hope you rot. I hope you die alone in that penthouse." I stood up. The sound of her screaming was muted by the thick glass, like a television with the volume turned down. It no longer had the power to hurt me. "I will not die alone," I said, picking up my coat. "I will live free, and unlike you, I will sleep soundly at night because everything I own, I earned. Harper, don't you walk away, Harper." I turned my back on them. I walked toward the heavy steel door where the guard was waiting. I could hear Meredith's muffled shrieks fading behind me, a ghost of the past trying to haunt a future that no longer belonged to it. "We are done here," I told the guard. The buzzer sounded a harsh, final note. The heavy door clanged shut, sealing them in their concrete box. I walked out of the prison and stepped onto the sidewalk. The Chicago wind hit my face, biting and cold. But for the first time in my life, it didn't feel like a chill. It felt like a cleansing. 6 months have passed since the strobe lights of the paparazzi blinded me in the grand ballroom, in the corporate world. Half a year is a lifetime. The scandal that dominated the headlines for weeks, the spectacular implosion of the Whitmore dynasty, has finally faded to the back pages of the business section, replaced by newer, louder crises. But inside the glass walls of Helios Systems, the silence is not empty. It is the productive, rhythmic silence of a machine that is finally running without friction. Under my leadership, the stock price has not just recovered, It has stabilized at an all-time high. The market realized very quickly that a forensic accountant makes a far better CEO than a socialite. I stripped away the vanity projects my parents had funded. I closed the shell companies. I opened the book so wide that any analyst in the world could see exactly where every penny was going. Transparency, it turned out, was a more valuable commodity than mystique. Last week, I made the final severance from my past. I sold the Whitmore family mansion. Walking through those empty halls one last time was like walking through a museum of bad memories. I saw the dining room where I was told I wasn't good enough. I saw the staircase where Bella used to pose for photos while I hid in the shadows. I sold it all: the house, the furniture, the art, even the silverware. I did not keep a single cent of the proceeds. Every dollar from the sale went into a restitution fund. I tracked down the people my parents had scammed: the small business owners, the contractors they never paid, the private lenders they defrauded. It took the entire sale of the estate to make them whole, but I did it. I washed the Whitmore name clean by erasing its debt, even if I could not erase its shame. With the remaining assets from my grandfather's personal trust, I established the Bella Foundation. For years, my parents had used my sister's name to throw lavish charity galas that were really just parties for themselves. I wanted her name to actually mean something. The foundation is dedicated to providing legal aid and financial literacy to young adults trapped in financially abusive families. It is for the invisible children, the ones who are controlled by purse strings and guilt. I think Bella, the real Bella who hated the spotlight, would have liked that. The final legal chapter closed yesterday morning. The trial was swift, the evidence overwhelming. Sterling and Meredith Whitmore were sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. I did not go to the sentencing. My lawyer, Elias, asked if I wanted to be there to see justice served, to see them led away in prison grays. I told him I had a board meeting, and I did. I sat at the head of the table in the conference room, discussing renewable energy grids and turbine efficiency, while across town, a judge banged a gavel to end my parents' lives as they knew them. I did not need to see their downfall to believe it. I had already moved past it. I did something else yesterday. I filed the paperwork to legally change my name. I dropped Whitmore entirely. It was a name associated with greed, with surface-level glamour, and with a hollow kind of love. I took my grandfather's name. I am now Harper Vane. It feels heavy, but it feels real. It is a name built on steel and sweat, not credit and lies. My life is quiet now, and that is the greatest luxury I own. I have found a circle of friends who do not know, or care, about the size of my portfolio. They are engineers, writers, and teachers. We talk about ideas, not people. Just last night, I went to dinner with a few of them. We went to a small, noisy Thai restaurant on the north side. The tables were sticky, the lights were too bright, and the noise from the kitchen was deafening. We split the bill 4 ways. As I sat there, laughing at a bad joke, eating noodles from a chipped bowl, I realized I was happier in that plastic chair than I had ever been in the velvet booth of the Obsidian. The food tasted better because I was paying for it with money I earned, surrounded by people who were there because they liked me, not because they feared me or wanted something from me. When I got home that night, there was a letter on my counter. Elias had brought it over. The envelope was stark white, stamped with the seal of the Metropolitan Correctional Center. The handwriting was Meredith's, spidery and frantic. I stood over my kitchen sink, holding the letter. I knew what was inside. It would be a guilt trip. It would be a plea. It would be a manipulation designed to hook into my heart and drag me back into their toxicity. She would say she was sick. She would say she was sorry. She would say she forgave me. I struck a match. I held the flame to the corner of the envelope. I watched the paper curl and blacken. I did not open it. I did not read a single word. I dropped the burning paper into the sink and turned on the tap, washing the ash down the drain. I did not owe them my anger anymore, and I certainly did not owe them my attention. Tonight, I stand on the rooftop terrace of the Helios Tower. The wind off Lake Michigan is strong, whipping my hair across my face. The city of Chicago spreads out below me, a grid of golden light stretching to the horizon. It is a beautiful, brutal city, and I have conquered it. I am not the scared girl who ran away at 18. I am not the invisible sister. I am the CEO. I am the survivor. I am the queen of an empire I saved from the fire. My parents tried to teach me that money was everything that it was worth sacrificing your soul, your family, and your dignity for. They were wrong. They taught me the most expensive lesson about money, that it cannot buy character, but it can buy the freedom to banish toxic people from your life forever. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. So please leave a comment below with your city or country, and let's share our thoughts. If you enjoyed watching justice be served, please make sure to subscribe to Veronica Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach more people who need to hear it.